From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Up first, an extended look at two key reports released by USDA this week: prospective plantings and grain stocks. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien breaks down how those reports led to a bullish response in the markets and what it means for growers moving forward. Also, K-State Research and Extension Director of Extension Greg Hadley had an opportunity yesterday to highlight the work of Extension to KSU faculty and staff during a virtual town hall meeting. We'll have more on that in the news segment. And K-State climatologist Mary Knapp wraps up the week with a look at how March weather shaped up across the state. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. USDA released two reports on Wednesday: prospective plantings and grain stocks. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien takes an extended look today at the bullish response to those two reports and the opportunities farmers are now faced with that don't present themselves very often. Dan, two reports coming out from USDA on Wednesday and a major impact on the market.
Well, yes, the USDA had put out its prospective plantings report and also its grain stocks report on Wednesday, the 31st. These represent conditions, especially for the grain stocks report, to keep in mind, as of the 1st of March. As the USDA talked to people, they tried to target their either phone calls or their phone surveys, whichever, to that time frame. Some things could have happened since then. Since that time, prices have moved around. Some declines happened in the wheat market, volatility up and down in both corn and soybeans. So things could have changed since that time. However, on the day that those reports came out, again, Wednesday the 31st, tremendous positive bullish response in the markets. And what it had to do was where the USDA's projections, their survey-based projections, came out relative to what expectations of the trade were coming into these reports. So as the grain traders would call it, it was bullish. And bullish to the degree that the futures limit locked up across the board in the corn complex, for soybeans for sure, and strong also in meal and in oil. For wheat, at or near limit run-ups for hard red and strong upward Chicago wheat, and also for spring wheat also. So when you look at the numbers, the expectations for corn were that we'd see about 93.1 million acres projected planted in the U.S. for 2021, and a range of expectations of 92 to 94.5. Well, the USDA's numbers came in at 91.1, below the bottom end of that range. For soybeans, also a surprise, expectations, average trade guess of 90 million acres, and within the range of guesses, of estimates, the guesses, 88.9 to 91.3, and so the USDA's number came in at 87.6. Also markedly below the bottom end of what any of these traders, that's including the extremes of what people were guessing. So in the corn markets, you saw limit move to the high side, and also saw that for soybeans. And I think that it just kind of behooves us to kind of stand back and look at what happened in terms of the pricing opportunities for new crop and old crop that came about. Well, for old crop, of course, we're looking at the May contract, traded up to, on that day, $5.6425. The Deese corn contract, which is important right now, especially because, it's April the 2nd as we're talking, and if we're not planting yet in parts of Kansas, we will be. So folks are making their planting acreage decisions for anything they haven't finalized their seed purchases for, et cetera, based on what the price prospects out there. So new crop December corn on that Wednesday traded up to about $4.77.5. And that was 25 cents higher. The soybeans traded up 70 cents, getting up to November new crop contract trading up to $12.5625. So here at KSU, we do our best to come up with reasonable estimates of cost of production, and we sort of view that as a reference price that people look at as they look to forward pricing crops. Generally, a 477 new crop corn bid with a basis of, depending on where you're at in the state, it could be some places were positive basis. A lot of places in a typical year we'd be 30, 40 under, something like that. But even at the most conservative of what you might think happened for basis bid, and as you look at forward contracts, we're well over $4, probably $4.25, $4.50 in most areas. In some places, closer to $5. The closer you are to the feedlot areas and ethanol plants, the better off you are, basically. Tremendous bids, well covering cost of production. But yet we're getting to the place now where we're just about ready to plant these crops, make judgments on soil moisture, et cetera. And with good crop insurance yields in hand, then we start looking at some type of a reasonable marketing plan heading off into the growing season and harvest. And for soybeans, again, the $12.56 that we saw on that day up, again, 70 cents. So we were at about $11.70, and suddenly we're at $12.56. Basis bids aren't quite as positive in most cases for beans. So, new crop bids probably still 11.5, 11.80, something like that, better in some areas. And cost of production for soybeans, again, $9, $10 in a lot of situations. So these are profitable prices. And we probably have a lot of people looking at this that have analyzed the markets and are having analysis followed by paralysis. And what do you do with this? These are great opportunities. What do you do with this? I guess, again, using the reference of your cost of production to at least start looking at, without overcommitting yourself for what you might get for a crop, at the end of it to go ahead and to look at some pricing would be sure an interesting thing to do. And the other side of that coin, you're not anticipating any major crop problems. And you have some moisture right now. We think, at this point, you think normal growing season weather. And most of the time, in most years, we get that probably 3/4 of the time. 80% of the time in the corn market, et cetera. And there are other market factors, worries about the second corn crop in Brazil and all that'll probably be supportive. But Jeff, for me, as I look at that corn number in particular, start plugging in the USDA's projection of 91.1 million acres, take a reasonable, about a 92% harvested to planted ratio, and then either put the USDA's projection of about 179.5 or my own more conservative, or KSU projection, about 175 bushels per acre. You're looking at a swing from about 15 billion bushels to about 14.6, and that's with 175 bushels per acre, which is no slouch of a yield. And you end up with ending stocks closer to 1.4, 1.3, something like that. The last time the USDA made a projection at their Outlook conference, they projected 1.55. So with what we've just seen here, we've lopped off, depending on how you look at it, about 150, 250 million bushels of ending stocks. Stocks to use, no matter where you look at it, you're looking at about 9.3 to 8.8% stocks to use. That's below 10. And just according to how prices in the past have responded to stocks to use in that area, accounting for inflation and all that stuff, just as you sit right now, that would be a season average price of about $4.50 to $5. And the last time the USDA made a projection at their Outlook conference, they had $4.20. So it's a, quote, big deal, what we've just seen happen.
You're thinking the Prospective Plantings report is pretty accurate then?
It is, based on what farmers told them and what they were expecting to see happen on March 1. Obviously, as we talked about, the market expectations were for about 93 million. This is closer to 91. So what held farmers back from planting as much as thought there, if these numbers are right? Well, cost of fertilizer has gone pretty high as people have been competing for inputs. Weather's been up and down in different areas, et cetera. Probably might be just a general conservatism about things. We have seen wheat planted acres up 5%. So that first place to look probably would be up to the northern plains to see if kind of anticipated switches out of spring wheat into corn and soybeans, if that occurred or not. So we'll scrutinize those numbers and see if that was the case. But if the number is accurate or ends up being accurate, probably could be due to wheat prices being just pretty good and people not as many people moving out of wheat or staying with wheat in their expectations as had been thought. You
mentioned basing your pricing on what is normal. Is that what you would suggest then?
Yes, I think so. I think the first place to start for any marketing plan probably is to ask the question whether they have profitable alternatives to look at. And so cost of production certainly be that. And in tight years where we're nowhere near covering full economic costs, that would include family labor and even buying land if you're in that mode, and replacement of machinery, again, full economic cost. Here we see prices that are covering full economic costs, and that really doesn't present itself very often. Our reference viewpoint would start with that, and then we look at what our expectations are for where the markets could go this year. And I think the issue that's out there, I'm an economist, they pay me to look at the potential downside. What's the downside? It would be that we'd have tremendous crops this year in the U.S., and the yields would more than over-race the reduction in acres that at least initially we're seeing, and we'd end up with prices moving lower into harvest. So that's the thing. I would like to go back and talk about soybeans, if that's okay for a minute. The USDA's, again, with their projection of 5.4% increase is no small increase, but expectations ahead of that for more like 7.5%. And if there's one of our commodities that was so tight that the low acreage number causes major repercussions, it was in soybeans, because I thought coming out of the USDA Outlook Conference that one reason that the USDA had plugged in such a high, 7.5% increase for soybeans is because they probably felt that's the only way they could balance the balance sheet out and not have supplies so tight that we started to crunch back both domestic crush and soybean exports. So here they came in, and farmers told them, well, we respect what you're doing, but we're not going to plant that much. So about 2% less than what they'd projected. So I think that we're in a situation where we're probably not going to go to zero on supplies. I basically put in that kind of a 100 million bushel floor. You could get below that in these years, but we start crunching back these supply prospects, acreage prospects, and have reasonable yields to go with them. You're in a situation where prices will rise, would have to rise to ration usage, which would be great for growers and sellers of soybeans, but a real financial crunch for the processors.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien. When Agriculture Today continues, Dan looks at the potential impact of low acreage numbers for soybeans and the marketing options that farmers have moving forward. This is the K-State Radio Network.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're listening to Agriculture Today. And Agriculture Today continues now with additional analysis in light of the prospective plantings and grain stocks reports that were released on Wednesday by USDA. K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien says that if you look at the soybean numbers that farmers reported to USDA and then say you're not going to let it go below 100 million bushels as an ending stocks figure, you're down to 2.2%.
And the USDA's projection on that was 11.25. The thing that, when I look at historically where we've been at price-wise when we're down to 2%, it's 13 and 14. So I understand the need to be judicious and to not be panicky in the markets. But so for my own price numbers, the USDA's projected 11.25. I put 12.25 with 2 question marks. Because a lot of times, again, in the past we've been this tight, we've crunched to the high side. I think the thing that's holding them back is expectation of the Brazilian soybean crop. South American soybean crop will be pretty good. So there's more at play here than just the U.S. crop. But still, if we're that terribly tight here in the U.S., when the time comes that Brazil's supplies do run short, when they run out of what they can export, then that demand pull tight supply crunch will be strong on the markets and have a major impact.
As producers look at some of these numbers that are coming out, is there something in the back of their mind that says, maybe I should jump on this bandwagon?
Well, without question, profitable opportunities are better to consider than not. I think the alluring thing and the challenging thing of dealing with uncertainty like this in the markets, and this is upside uncertainty, at least for right now, is that we have have a difficult time knowing when to cash in on prices. And when prices go down, there's a lot of regret for having missed out on better opportunities when maybe still 50 cents lower from the top of the market is still $2 better than where we were 2 months ago. So we keep changing our reference price, what we measure success on based on a moving target. I think if we go back to cost of production or what prices we had at harvest and see where we're at, even if the market says they've gyrated up and they'll gyrate down, back and forth, up and down, even with that, to be judicious in what you judge yourself to be successful at, in terms of covering, is good. And again, prices at harvest, which were compared to now, are pretty conservative, and some idea of the price you have to be long term, overall sustainable in your operation would drive you to go ahead and move forth.
Are there some options then that allow you to be aggressive in some areas, but still, I guess, more or less cover yourself in other areas?
Well, you look at the market basket of what people have to work with. The first thing in Kansas that we'll probably look at for most people will be forward contracts. And I'm assuming we're talking about new crop bids. And most of those forward contracts would involve a commitment to deliver X number of bushels for a price out in at or right after harvest 2021. So you're looking way out into October, November, December of this coming year. There's a lot of risk and uncertainty in doing that. So because of that, people are most are probably pretty conservative in terms of what percentage of their expected production to price. In fact, that uncertainty in wheat especially is really an inhibitor for a lot of forward pricing. And it's kind of a shame because July contracts $5.81 3/4 for hard red winter wheat, or it was on Wednesdays as it closed. So tremendous run in the market. So that production uncertainty would come into play. I think we have had pretty good revenue insurance prices that helped to soften that blow, or the potential blow, or the potential risk of being caught short and needing to buy bushels back in the market to fill a contract. So anyway, that's there to look at. So forward contracting would be first. The variations off of that in terms of hedge to arrive contracts, where you lock in the futures and let the basis move. Some will see great basis levels to lock in the basis, and that's not a bad deal, especially with grain sorghum. Point is that forward contracts and its variants are probably the first thing we look at. Some people will do hedges, some that are that'd be futures hedges, and then they're not making a bushel commitment to a local elevator or local merchandiser. However, there's probably an acquired level of comfort and expertise in dealing directly with market brokers, et cetera. And we have a number of very good ones in Kansas that people can deal with to keep them informed. So that helps to mitigate some of that. We can look at some options. I tell you that the thing to look at would have been what the price of some of the new crop corn options and new crop soybean options were before that report on Wednesday was released and what they are now. And with that prices running up, anybody that had bought put options as the market ran up, well, they had been protected on the low side, but now they've probably lost some value, although still a lot of volatility still keeps some. But boy, any call options that had been bought to protect from prices moving higher, if someone had forward contract ahead of that, they intrinsically, if they were at the money, they went up by the amount that the futures were locked. In fact, some of my colleagues at KSU are looking at, again, the situation where when the futures get locked out, they limit high, limit low, the options markets can still keep trading. So you can sort of find where the markets can settle at by what the futures are. And so anybody wondering in these volatile markets what's really going on when we're locked up or locked down, again, go look at the options markets to see where the put call price parity is, and that'll give you some idea where the market's really kind of settling at.
Historically, when something like this occurs, do we see some movement in the following weeks, following months, or do we see a lot of volatility?
Well, right now we're set up for volatility. And, Jeff, I guess I'd ask a question back. Is it a bias to say what goes up must come down? Or vice versa? Is it a bias? Well, that's human nature. We tend to distrust run-ups and we distrust things falling off too in prices. But to me, I think what really stands out is that this is happening right now. Very beginning of April, we're pulling planters into the fields in Kansas and all across the United States. So how will these price run-ups in both the old crop bids that give us an idea of enthusiasm for the market and the reality of the new crop bids of what we'll actually have out there, how might this affect farmers' perspective on what they're going to plant? And I don't have my calculator with me, but if you wanted to see what were the markets saying, well, on that day, on Wednesday, take the new crop bid for soybeans, November 21 soybeans at $12.56, and divide that by the D's corn bid of $4.77. I'm shaving off a tenth of cents as half cents. And, is that 2.6? Is that 2.5? Is that 2.8? To the degree it's above 2.5, heading to 2.6 or 2.7, then it's probably advantaged soybeans in a lot of areas. So we'll see. I think even with that, people kind of gravitate to what they're good at. What's their distinctive competency? And the farther west you go, if you're really good at growing corn, you'll sure look at soybeans and other crops, but you'll have in mind that what you're most confident of being good at. I think that switches more to even field as we head off into Illinois and Indiana, where they have stupendously good soybean yields. So it's more of an even call there than in our part of the country. And with what I just said, I don't want to besmirch soybeans at all. In the eastern half of Kansas, we do very good for soybeans. We can do well in the western half also, but we're probably more likely to look at that under irrigation. Would mention that on the grain stocks report that the soybean numbers came in about as expected, so it's probably not a lot of impact on the April 9th supply-demand balance sheet. That'll come out in the WASDE report. For the corn results, we ended up with about 78 million bushels less than we'd anticipated. And we generally do a pretty good job of figuring out how many exports we've had, how much ethanol usage we've got, what corn milling. But it's feed and residual because we can't measure it very well. So if we've had stronger than expected usage, it's very likely that it was livestock feeding. On the other side, for wheat came in about 40 million bushels higher for the March 1st stock number than had been anticipated. So what does that mean? Well, as of March 1, when they were measuring this and with what people told them, if there's wheat feeding that had happened, perhaps a lot of the quantity of it hadn't fully kicked in yet, or maybe wasn't going to happen. That's a big deal in our hard red winter wheat area. We've had a lot of reports of wheat feeding going on. In fact, the head scratcher number for me is that the wheat number didn't show as much as you might expect. But what I need to do is dig into this report all that much more and find out, is it hard red winter wheat that's kind of the culprit, or is it soft red winter, hard red spring, et cetera, that you really see that more. So there's more depth to be gone into to really dissect that wheat figure.
That's K-State grain market economist Dan O'Brien with an extended look at the impact of Wednesday's prospective plantings and grain stocks reports released by USDA. Those reports, by the way, caused a bullish response in the markets. He says that farmers are now faced with opportunities that don't present themselves very often. His full analysis can be found online at agmanager.info. agmanager.info. Agriculture Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Burning prairie grass is essential for Flint Hills ranchers. Following grazing and burning best practices can ensure that the prairie remains intact while not smoking out downwind neighbors. The Kansas Flint Hills Smoke Management Plan helps guide prescribed burning on prairie land. To learn more, visit www.ksfire.org. Again, that's www.ksfire.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, as might be expected, reactions to Wednesday's USDA planting intentions report are still coming in from analysts and the Agriculture Secretary. Gary Crawford has more.
How would the Agriculture Secretary describe Wednesday's USDA Prospective Plantings report?
A bit surprising.
Tom Vilsack's reaction to the report showing farmers intend to plant far fewer acres to soybeans and corn than expected, especially given recent rising prices. So the result, futures go up the limit the day of the report, continue up the next morning, and USDA's chief economist Seth Meyer says this is a longer-term market response.
It isn't just the nearby contracts which jump. It is contracts out a ways as well, too, because the market's looking to say those numbers would put us in a tighter situation longer run, therefore we must bid higher.
Good news, obviously, for commodity producers.
But, of course, Tom Vilsack says,
I think livestock producers are maybe potentially concerned about the cost of feed.
But he says, remember, this USDA planting intentions report came from farmer surveys done weeks ago, and for many, planting is weeks away, and so
things could obviously change as farmers sort of evaluate what's taken place.
The report itself could change farmers' planting plans. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
K-State Research and Extension Director of Extension Greg Hadley had an opportunity yesterday to highlight the work of Extension to KSU faculty and staff during a virtual town hall meeting. As part of his presentation, Hadley focused on the work Extension does to improve the lives of Kansans and its work in 5 key areas.
When we think about the land-grant mission, Kansas State University is the land-grant university of Kansas. There are 3 primary mission areas: research, teaching, and extension. And those 3 research areas are interdependent. They work together and they support each other to help Kansans improve their lives, livelihoods, and communities. We have faculty, extension agents, extension specialists spread throughout the state. And we also have agents in every one of our 105 county offices spread throughout every county in Kansas. Our 380 FTEs of specialists and agents did a lot of work this past year, and we're very proud of that work. We had essentially 700,000 direct educational contacts, almost 750,000 indirect educational contacts. And in addition to all the work that the agents and specialists did last year during the COVID crisis, we had our volunteers supporting our educational programs by supplying over 150,000 volunteer hours. Those 700,000 contact hours were distributed through what we call 5 grand challenges. And our top grand challenge area, we had about 29% of our direct educational contacts went towards developing tomorrow's leaders. That includes both youth and adult leaders. And in fact, in a special situation last year, some of our specialists were called upon to actually help our legislators with how they discuss issues to improve them with their leadership skills. 24% of our direct educational contacts went to helping Kansans deal with issues related to our food systems, and that includes everything from farm to fork. 19% of those direct educational contact hours went to helping Kansans deal with health issues and helping communities create a culture of health that's unique and special for each one of our Kansas communities. 18% went to community vitality efforts. And what that means is that we had specialists and agents helping community leaders improve the strength of their communities and also enhance the overall community vitality of their communities. And finally, 10% of those direct educational contacts were directed towards helping Kansans deal with water issues.
Hadley says that Extension's water effort includes water quality, water supply, and water quantity issues related to the Ogallala Aquifer. He also highlighted Extension's outreach, research efforts, and partnerships. And finally, in today's agricultural news, here's this week's Wheat Scoop with Marcia Boswell.
Kansas wheat farmer Wade Bangerter is his own best customer. Each harvest, he scoops wheat by the bucketful out of the combine or wheat truck and saves it back to clean, prepare, and eat for the year to come. But anyone can enjoy the nutty but sweet flavor of wheat kernels, also referred to as wheat berries, prepared whole and unprocessed, along with gaining a great set of nutritional benefits. Bangerter said wheat berries are versatile and have nice flavor. It's great nutrition and it's affordable. Bangerter is a third-generation farmer who grows dryland wheat, corn, and milo in Wichita, Wallace, and Logan counties. After farming for nearly 40 years, he noticed the trend of consumers eating fewer wheat foods, but did not give it much notice until his own family started debating the health attributes of wheat. He decided to do his own research, followed by experimentation on the farm and in the kitchen, to see how farming practices and flavor interact. Using the wheat cleaned and stored from his fields, Bangerter has a simple strategy for preparing the wheat berries. Add 3 cups of water for each cup of wheat and boil for an hour. His favorite way to prepare wheat berries is to mix in some honey and cinnamon as a side dish, but he also puts them in soups and salads and substitutes wheat berries for rice. In addition to being a great ingredient, wheat berries include all the benefits of whole wheat foods, including improved heart and bone health, preventing anemia, and promoting blood sugar control. Wheat berries also include up to 24% of daily fiber requirements and 10% of recommended daily iron intake in a quarter-cup serving. After finding wheat berries were not only delicious, but also easy to include in family meals, Bangerter took his experimentation a step further, trying to see if what he was doing in the field resulted in a difference in taste. Microbial activity is now his focus of soil management, which he promotes by implementing no-till practices and top dressing with fertilizers that benefit what's going on above and beneath the soil surface. Bangerter said, "We are trying to take a more holistic approach to the soil than we had in the past. I'm trying to grow wheat like people grow wine. It's all about how soil affects flavor." He said, "My next goal after perfecting growing and packaging is to start a farm-to-table internet business to get this very healthy wheat to the people this year." Bangerter's 2021 wheat crop is greening up nicely and looks healthy with good color, thanks to catching crucial rainfall last week. His fields received timely rain in the fall at planting, and that established a good stand that endured below zero temperatures without much freeze damage. As for how the wheat will yield and taste, those results will come this summer when those kernels come off the combine and into the pot on Bangerter's stove. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
And that's a look at today's agricultural news. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
You're listening to Agriculture Today from the K-State Radio Network. As usual, we wrap up the week with a check of agricultural weather with K-State Research and Extension Assistant State Climatologist Mary Knapp. March weather data will soon be in the record books officially, but for now, Mary says the preliminary data shows that the weather had a little bit of something for everybody. Mary, as we move into April and start to think about March was one of those wetter than normal months this time.
Right, and that was fairly unusual. We ended up being just a shade under 2 times the normal for the month of March. And what's even more impressive is that that all the divisions were over 1.5 times their normal for March. Particularly in the West, we benefited very nicely. It ranged from an average of 3.01 in the Southwest to 3.51 in the Northwest. And that is reflected in the U.S. Drought Monitor. We cleared up a lot of the drought. We managed to push the extreme out of the state. And now the eastern 2/3 of the state are completely drought-free. We don't even have any abnormally dry conditions. So that was very, very welcome.
And the areas that have been dry since summer are finally starting to catch up.
They're starting to catch up. There's still lingering impacts there. And so we still have on the U.S. Drought Monitor that was released on Thursday, we still have areas of moderate to severe drought in the Northwest and, well, basically in all of the Western divisions.
I'm not sure how often we see a 4-inch rainfall in March in Kansas, but I think we did this year.
Yes, we do get them occasionally. Typically, it's more in the eastern part of the state. This year's 24-hour maximum rainfall fell at Webster Dam in Rooks County On the 15th, they had 4.07 inches, and that takes the prize for the greatest 24-hour total. But again, I think what's noteworthy is that rainfall was distributed across the state. For the most part, it was very beneficial. The rains persisted over several days, so we didn't get that 4.07 inches in a 4-hour period, and that allowed for it to penetrate into the soils a lot better than might have been the other case. Benefits on it, the wheat crop has improved tremendously. We're getting into those temperatures that are ideal for its development, and that moisture really helped get that along. Negative side of it, it has slowed some field work. Producers that were out trying to do weed control, putting on fertilizer, were locked out of the field for a couple of days.
In terms of temperatures, there was kind of a mixed bag. We had some high highs, we had some low lows.
Right. We had a very wide temperature gradient across the month. We started the month with our coldest reading out at Garden City Experiment Station on the 1st, where they got down to 10 degrees. We ended the month with our warmest reading of 92 degrees Fahrenheit out at Syracuse in Hamilton County on the 30th. So again, a really wide temperature swing for the month. Overall, the month averaged 46.9 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just a shade under 4 degrees warmer than normal, and it ranked as the 22nd warmest March of record.
This is also then helping the soil temperatures to increase as well?
Well, it's kind of a slow warm-up with the soil temperatures. The warmer air temperatures certainly aren't hurting things at all, but the fact that we got a lot of moisture means that those soils are saturated and are slower to warm. It also hasn't helped that we've had a lot of cloudy days, particularly in the second half of the month. So that slows the amount of energy that the soils can capture to increase the warmth. So we are seeing warmer temperatures. They've gotten back to about what we would typically expect at this time of the year, but it hasn't warmed up nearly so much as you might expect with those readings in the 80s and 90s.
Because I know corn growers are getting to the point where they'd like to start planting soon.
Right. And again, you can check out the Mesonet website and check those soil temperatures. You can graph them over a week's time to see how they're doing, because it isn't just what it's reading now, it's what it's sustained at. And Ignacio Ciampidi has an article in this week's E-Update that addresses those issues of what is the ideal temperature to plant that corn.
March is always considered a transitional month. What was the driving force behind kind of the mixed bag of weather we had?
We had a couple of very vigorous fronts that came through, and some of them had very slow progressions, and so that allowed for those persistent rainstorms to develop. We also ended up with a fairly windy March, and for more details on that wind pattern and exactly what was driving it, again, check out the Agronomy E-Update. There's an article on the March winds and how that fits into what we would normally expect.
A lot of days where we had gusts into the 50s.
Yes, a lot of that, and that created problems on both ends of the month. At the beginning of March, we were still dry, so there were a lot of wildfires out there and a lot of very active fire behavior. Some people might have thought with the rains that we had in the middle and the end of the month that fire danger would be reduced. Unfortunately, most of our fuels are what are known as one-hour fuels. They dry down very quickly. And when we have the kind of wind conditions that we had in this last week, coupled with very low humidities, you can have very, very active fire behavior. And that can be a double challenge because you have that active fire behavior, but your access may be slowed due to the muddy ground conditions.
What are we expecting then for the rest of April and then maybe moving into summer?
Well, when we look at the April, the Climate Prediction Center's outlook for April calls for warmer than normal temperatures across the state, and it also has a slight chance for drier than normal conditions across, again, a large portion of the state. When you carry that out to the April, May, June pattern, the area that is expected to be drier than normal shrinks a little bit, leaving the eastern edge in equal chances for above or below normal. But for the most part, again, slight tilt towards drier than average.
And for our Easter weekend, are things looking good?
At this point, they're looking very nice. We're looking at temperatures in the mid-70s to the low 80s with sunshine. There is a chance of moisture moving in towards the middle of next week, and we'll have to see how that actually develops.
That's K-State Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp with a look at Kansas agricultural weather. Again, for more weather information, visit mesonet.ksu.edu. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, wishing you a happy and safe Easter weekend. This is the K-State Radio Network.